All right, so today we're diving deep into the world of Tiesto, the iconic DJ who helped put EDM on the map.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to be talking about the allegations swirling around millions he allegedly stashed in offshore accounts.
Right.
You might be thinking, wait, isn't he already rolling in dough?
Yeah.
Well, that's where the story takes a turn.
It sure does.
It's fascinating how, even with a career like his, some people allegedly seek ways to shield their wealth.
Yeah.
And the details of this alleged scheme, they're not just your run-of-the-mill tax avoidance tactics.
No, not at all. What we're looking at here
Right.
are elaborate structures designed to make income seemingly vanish into thin air using a network of shell companies and offshore havens.
Okay, break that down for me. What makes these shell companies so effective at obscuring things?
Well, think of a shell company as a ghost corporation.
Okay.
It exists only on paper, with no real employees or operations. It's essentially an empty shell used to hold assets and obscure the true owner's identity.
So it's like a mask hiding who's really pulling the strings.
Exactly.
But how do these offshore havens fit into the picture?
Right.
I always thought they were just for fictional spies and villains.
They might sound like something out of a movie.
Right.
But offshore havens are real places with specific laws and regulations.
Okay.
They offer things like low or zero taxes and, crucially, strict secrecy.
Ah, so that's how they manage to keep things under wraps.
Yeah.
But secrecy alone doesn't mean someone's dodging taxes.
Right.
What else is allegedly going on here?
Well, in Tiesto's case, the allegations suggest a complex web of financial maneuvering. His financial advisor, Frank Butzelaar, is accused of orchestrating this scheme for him and several other wealthy clients.
Wait, so this advisor might have been running a whole operation?
That's right.
It makes you wonder if this kind of thing is more common than we think.
It definitely raises questions about how much wealth is hidden in these offshore structures and the strategies used to keep it out of sight.
It sounds almost too clever to get caught. What makes these schemes vulnerable? How are authorities catching on?
Well, while these strategies can be sophisticated, they're not foolproof. The U.S. government in particular has stepped up efforts to combat offshore tax evasion, especially when it comes to high-profile individuals.
So there's a spotlight on celebrities and their finances that makes sense given the potential sums involved.
Exactly. And authorities are utilizing various methods to track these hidden transactions. For instance, they might uncover inconsistencies in someone's declared income compared to their lavish lifestyle. Or they might track money flows through complex international transactions.
It seems like a game of cat and mouse between those trying to hide their wealth and those trying to bring it back into the light.
It is, and it raises questions about the fairness of the system. After all, not everyone has access to these complex strategies or advisors who specialize in navigating these murky waters.
That's a really good point. It almost feels like a two-tiered system where the rules are different for the ultra-wealthy.
And that perception of inequality fuels the debate surrounding offshore tax havens. It's not just about lost tax revenue, but also about fairness and whether everyone is playing by the same rules.
I'm starting to see how this goes way beyond one DJ.
Yeah.
We're talking about a much bigger issue that impacts everyone.
Precisely. Tiesto's case is just one piece of a much larger puzzle. And to understand its significance, we need to delve into the history and mechanics of these offshore havens.
Okay, let's do that because I'm already feeling like I need a crash course in international finance.
Well, you're in the right place for that. What's fascinating is how these havens evolved over time, often tied to historical forces like colonialism and globalization.
Hold on, colonialism?
Yeah,
You're saying today's offshore havens have roots going back centuries?
that's right. Some of these jurisdictions were established as overseas territories or dependencies, and those historical connections laid the groundwork for the complex financial structures we see today.
That adds a whole new layer to this. So we're not just talking about modern tax avoidance strategies. We're talking about legacies that continue to shape global finance.
Exactly. Understanding this historical context is key to grasping the scale and complexity of the issue. It's not simply a case of a few individuals trying to cut corners. It's a system that's been evolving for generations.
Wow, I had no idea. It ran so deep. This is definitely getting more interesting by the minute.
And we're just scratching the surface. Let's dive a little deeper into how these havens operate and the specific tactics used to move wealth offshore.
Okay, lead the way. I'm ready to get my hands dirty in the world of international finance.
All right, let's do it. So we've established that these havens offer secrecy and favorable tax laws.
Right.
But how does the money actually get there?
Right.
It's not like you could just stuff a suitcase full of cash and hop on a plane. right?
Right. I'm picturing those old movies with secret Swiss bank accounts and numbered lockboxes. But in today's digital world, it has to be more sophisticated than that.
You're absolutely right. These days, it's all about moving money electronically, often using complex financial instruments that make it difficult to track the origins and ultimate destination of the funds.
Okay, that sounds complicated.
Uh,
Can you give me a real-world example of how this might work?
sure. Imagine a musician earns royalties from their music being streamed globally.
Okay.
Instead of those royalties going directly to their account in their home country,
Right.
they might be routed through a series of shell companies in different offshore jurisdictions.
So it's like creating a maze for the money to travel through,
Yeah.
making it hard to follow the trail back to the source.
Exactly. And each step of the way, there might be legal arrangements that exploit loopholes in different tax codes, minimizing the overall tax liability.
It sounds like something only the ultra-wealthy with teams of lawyers and accountants could pull off.
Well, access to these strategies is certainly easier for those with significant resources.
Hmm.
However, the internet and globalization have made these techniques more accessible even to those with more modest wealth.
That's interesting. So while we're focusing on high-profile cases like Tiesto's, this is an issue that goes far beyond celebrities.
Absolutely. The rise of online businesses and digital assets has further blurred the lines, making it even more challenging to track and tax income generated across borders.
It's starting to feel like the global financial system is becoming increasingly complex and difficult to regulate.
That's a key point.
Yeah.
And it raises the question, how do governments and international organizations respond to these challenges?
Right, because if this is happening on such a large scale, there must be efforts to crack down on it.
There are. We've seen initiatives like the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act, or FAC,
Okay.
which requires foreign banks to report on accounts held by U.S. citizens. This was a major step in trying to increase transparency and make it harder to hide assets offshore.
That sounds like a pretty powerful tool.
Yeah.
But I imagine those determined to evade taxes are always coming up with new ways to stay ahead of the game.
It's a constant back and forth. As regulations tighten, those seeking to avoid taxes find new loopholes or jurisdictions with more favorable laws. It's a continuous game of adaptation.
It all feels incredibly complex and almost impossible for the average person to grasp, let alone influence.
It can feel overwhelming, I agree. But that's why awareness and education are so important. The more people understand these issues, the better equipped we are to demand accountability and push for reforms that promote a fairer system.
That's a good point. Knowledge is power, right?
Exactly.
But even if we understand the mechanics, there's still the ethical debate surrounding offshore tax havens.
Right.
Some might argue that individuals have a right to minimize their tax burden within the legal framework, even if it involves these offshore strategies.
That's a valid point, and it's a debate with no easy answers. One perspective is that individuals should be free to structure their finances in a way that minimizes their tax liability as long as they're following the letter of the law.
So it's about individual freedom and choice within the existing legal system.
Yes. But others argue that this perspective overlooks the broader societal impact of tax avoidance. If everyone with the means shifted their wealth offshore, governments would be deprived of the resources needed to fund essential services and programs.
So it becomes a question of balancing individual rights with the collective good. It's almost like a social contract we all agree to.
Precisely. And the argument goes that those who benefit most from the system, the ultra-wealthy, have a greater responsibility to contribute to its upkeep.
That makes sense. If you're reaping the rewards of a stable society and economy, shouldn't you also contribute your fair share to maintain it?
It's a perspective that emphasizes social responsibility and the interconnectedness of our financial well-being.
Okay, so we've got individual freedom versus social responsibility. It's a complex dilemma. But what about the argument that these offshore havens actually benefit the global economy? I've heard some say they promote investment and create jobs.
That's another aspect of the debate. Some argue that these havens act as financial hubs, attracting capital that can then be invested in developing economies, fostering growth and job creation.
So it's like a trickle-down effect where
Yeah.
wealth flows from these havens to stimulate economic activity elsewhere.
That's the theory, but the reality is often more nuanced. Critics argue that much of the money flowing through these havens is actually being siphoned away from developing economies, rather than being invested back into them.
So instead of being a source of investment, these havens could actually be exacerbating global inequality.
That's the concern raised by many economists and policymakers. They argue that these havens facilitate illicit financial flows, allowing corrupt officials and corporations to hide stolen wealth, depriving developing countries of much-needed resources.
This is definitely a conversation with no easy answers. It seems like there are valid arguments on both sides of the debate. But what I'm taking away from this is that offshore tax havens are not just a financial issue. They're a societal issue with complex ethical dimensions.
You're absolutely right. And it's a topic that deserves more open and honest discussion. We need to move beyond simplistic narratives and engage with the complexities and trade-offs involved.
Okay, so we've unpacked the mechanics of offshore havens and explored the ethical arguments surrounding them. But let's bring it back to Tiesto. What are the potential legal ramifications for him in all of this?
That's the million-dollar question, literally. Will Tiesto face charges? It's still unclear, and legal experts are divided on the likelihood.
So we're in wait-and-see mode?
For now, yes. Some legal experts believe that if he can demonstrate he was unaware of the specifics of the alleged scheme, or that he relied entirely on his advisor's guidance, he might avoid prosecution.
So it could come down to proving his level of knowledge and involvement?
Exactly. But others argue that his level of wealth and the scale of the alleged tax avoidance make it unlikely he'll escape scrutiny. They believe this case could set a precedent for how the U.S. government pursues tax-dodging celebrities in the future.
This case could have significant implications for how celebrity finances are scrutinized in the future. It's definitely worth keeping an eye on. What are the possible outcomes if he is charged?
Well, the potential consequences range from substantial fines to, in extreme cases, even jail time. But the legal process is complex and can take years to unfold.
Okay, so we'll have to wait and see how this all plays out.
Yeah.
But even if he's not charged, this whole situation has brought the issue of offshore tax havens into the spotlight. It's made people question how celebrities and the ultra-wealthy manage their finances and whether they're playing by the same rules as everyone else.
That's a key takeaway from this case. Tiesto's case, regardless of its legal outcome, has sparked a broader conversation about wealth taxation and the role of offshore finance in the global economy. It's forced us to confront uncomfortable questions about fairness, accountability, and the social contract we all share.
It's definitely a conversation we need to be having, but it's a conversation that can feel intimidating, like wading into a deep and murky pool.
I understand that feeling.
Yeah.
But the more we shine a light on these issues, the less power they hold over us. Knowledge is the antidote to fear and complacency.
So instead of being intimidated, we should be empowered to learn more and demand a fairer system for everyone.
Exactly. And remember, this isn't just about Tiesto or even just about celebrities. It's about understanding how the global financial system works and how it impacts all of us.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground here, from the mechanics of offshore havens to the ethical dilemmas they raise to the potential legal fallout for Tiesto. What are your final thoughts on this as we start to wrap things up?
Well, I think it's essential to recognize that these are complex issues with no easy solutions. There are valid arguments on all sides, and it's through open and honest dialogue we can move towards a system that's more equitable and sustainable.
So it's not about pointing fingers or assigning blame, but rather about understanding the complexities and working towards a better future.
Exactly. And that starts with education awareness and a willingness to engage with these challenging topics.
I completely agree. This deep dive has given me a lot to think about.
Me too. It's a reminder that even the most seemingly glamorous industries can have a darker side, and that wealth, even when legally acquired, carries with it a responsibility to contribute to the well-being of society as a whole.
That's a powerful statement. It's not just about how much money you make, but also about how you use that money and the impact it has on the world around you.
Precisely. And that applies to all of us, whether we're international DJs, everyday listeners, or anyone in between.
Okay, so we're nearing the end of our deep dive, and I'm still processing all this information. It's been a roller coaster of insights and revelations, but I'm curious, is there one key takeaway you want to leave our listeners with today?
If there's one thing I want listeners to ponder, it's this: every financial transaction, every dollar earned or spent has a ripple effect that extends far beyond ourselves. Our choices as individuals and as a society have consequences, and understanding the complexities of the global financial system is crucial to making informed and ethical choices.
That's a great point. We're all connected, and our financial decisions have a real impact on the world around us. It's a reminder to be mindful to ask questions and to demand transparency from those in positions of power.
Absolutely. And remember, this is an ongoing conversation. We can't afford to be complacent. The pursuit of a fairer and more equitable financial system requires constant vigilance, critical thinking, and a willingness to challenge the status quo.
Okay, well, that's some serious food for thought.
Yeah, it is.
It's definitely a lot to unpack, but I think it's important to remember that we're not just talking about abstract concepts here.
Right.
These financial decisions, these offshore structures, they have real-world consequences for people's lives.
Absolutely. Every dollar that's sheltered in a tax haven is a dollar that's not being invested in public services infrastructure or social programs. It's a dollar that's not contributing to the well-being of society as a whole.
And that brings us back to the question you posed earlier, what could that money have been used for if it had been taxed fairly?
Right.
It's almost mind-boggling to think about the potential impact.
Imagine the schools that could be built, the hospitals that could be funded, the research that could be conducted. The possibilities are endless. And it's not just about the things we can see and touch, it's also about the opportunities that are lost, the potential that's never realized when resources are diverted away from the common good.
It's like a hidden drain on our collective potential. We're all paying the price for this, even if we don't realize it.
That's a powerful way to put it, and it highlights the importance of demanding greater transparency and accountability from those who benefit most from the current system. We need to hold our leaders and institutions responsible for creating a fairer and more just financial system.
It's a call to action for all of us, isn't it? We can't just sit back and expect others to fix this. We need to be informed, engaged, and willing to speak up for what we believe in.
Exactly, and it starts with conversations like this. By shedding light on these complex issues, by engaging in open and honest dialogue, we can start to shift the narrative and create a more equitable future for everyone.
This deep dive has been a real eye-opener for me. I've learned so much about the intricacies of offshore finance and the ethical dilemmas it poses, but it's also left me with a sense of hope, a sense that change is possible if we're willing to work for it.
I share that hope, and I believe that by working together, by demanding more from our leaders, and by holding each other accountable, we can create a world where wealth is used to uplift communities, not just individuals.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive. But before we go, I want to leave our listeners with a final thought.
Please do what's on your mind.
The next time you see a celebrity flaunting their wealth or a politician talking about tax cuts for the wealthy, remember this conversation. Remember that every financial decision has consequences, and that we all have a role to play in creating a fairer and more just world.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
Ask questions, demand transparency, and never stop pushing for a better future.
That's a great note to end on. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. It's been an incredible journey.
The pleasure was all mine. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in and for being a part of this important conversation.
We'll see you next time for another deep dive into the hidden world behind the headlines. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and keep asking those tough questions.